Hi everyone, and welcome back to Afternoon Tea, our second afternoon together as we are reading through Psalm 119 over the next 2 weeks. Hopefully you had a chance to read ahead. Verses 9 to 16 is what we're going to be looking at today. And I'm going to kick us off by jumping right in with verse 9. Verse 9 is a question and an answer. How can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever we see young person and purity in the same sentence, we immediately think that the problem is sex. I know when I read this verse as a young teenage boy, that's exactly where my mind went. No surprises there. But interestingly enough, I don't think that's the connection that the psalmist is making here at the beginning of this second stanza. Purity means one thing. It means a single focus. So for example, think of pure mountain spring water. It means that it's just water and there's no chemicals or chlorine or other stuff mixed in. Think about if you go to the shop and you buy pure honey. That means there's no added glucose syrup or other junk. You're getting just what the bees made. And in the same sense, the path of purity here is the idea of living life focused, believing, loving one thing. Now, with that idea of the path of purity, that really picks up the language from the beginning of the psalm that we saw yesterday. The walking according to the law of the Lord, seeking Him, following His ways. We're on this journey. We're on this road of life. And the psalmist says, how can I remain with my affections and my desires and my attention focused on God and His Word as my greatest delight? That's the dilemma that begins this second stanza in verse 9. And the answer is, well, by living according to your Word. The question really reflects what Jesus says in the Gospels when He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. That's what the psalmist is looking for here. It's really interesting in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3, Paul uses this same language when he speaks to the church in Corinth. He says to them, I'm afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the snake's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. He's worried that they will stray off the path of Psalm 119, that they won't have pure devotion, pure love for God and His Word. And that's why I find verse 11 back in our psalm is just such a great verse. And it's really the one that jumped out to me as I was reading this for myself. Verse 11, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. See, how do you remain pure on the path? How do you restrain sin in your life? Put sin to death? Do battle with it day by day? Well, you take God's word, you hide it in your heart. That doesn't mean you keep it undercover. It means you bury it deep inside. You put it at the very core of who you are, so that every desire, thought, inclination, priority, decision you make is shaped and reformed by God's word. Well, have a look at the second half of the psalm. Like I said yesterday, the second half of the stanza. The first 4 verses introduce an idea. The second 4 verses develop it. And we've got the same thing here in verses 9 to 16. You'll notice 13, 14, 15, 16, 4 convictions, 4 decisions that he makes. He says, I will recount, I will rejoice, I will meditate, and I will delight and not neglect. You see, what we're really getting here in the second half of the psalm is the psalmist's habits, his routines. It's his habitual behaviour and attitude that he has decided to change and commit himself to based on the question and answer he's given himself in verse 9. I wonder how your habits and routines have changed even during this lockdown period. Have they changed for the better? Have they changed for the worse? Have they not really changed at all? Well, that's something that we always struggle with, isn't it? So let's have a look at these last 4 verses and to see if the psalmist's inclinations can't shape our own habits and routines as well. Verse 13, he says, I will recount with my lips. I will tell back. Over the last couple of years, our kids have picked up that language in terms of their schooling. The activity often asks them to tell back what they have learnt, which is really a great habit and a great way to learn something. And I think that's the idea he's picking up here. I don't think he's talking about recounting with his words so that he can evangelize his friends. I think he's talking about recounting to himself. He's preaching to himself. He's got to keep that message in the forefront of his mind, and he keeps reminding himself of it day by day. And then in verse 14, I will rejoice in following your statutes as one rejoices in great riches. If you were to win 100 million rand, how happy would you be? How would you rejoice? What joy would you have? How it would bubble up from within and overflow in everything you do, and it would just change everything about you, wouldn't it? It would change your whole experience. Well, the psalmist says, I'm going to find joy in your word even more than I find joy in all the other things in my life. There are a lot of things in life that are going to bring you joy, but he says the thing that is my greatest delight is going to be God's word. Verse 15, I will meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. Meditate, consider. It's not the crossed-legged stance of the yogi or the guru. In the Bible, to meditate is to sit back and to think deeply. It's not to switch your mind off, it's to switch your mind on and to deeply ponder and consider and turn over in your mind God's word. How does this apply to my situation? How would my life be different if I did more of this or less of that? How is this going to help me to live the wise life? He's going to meditate and consider, not superficial. And lockdown is so good for this, right? We've got a bit more time. We're able to focus our routines and be less distracted, hopefully. And so verse 15 is something that absolutely you can be doing. And verse 16, I will delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. There's this idea of Bible delight. He's going to find joy and pleasure in God's word. It's not a duty or a chore for him. And he's not going to neglect it. It's so easy to neglect it, isn't it? It's literally taken lockdown for me to get my Bible reading and daily prayer back on track. I hope you've had the same experience. We can be kind of slow and kind of thick in that way. But here's his conviction. I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. Well, this stanza helps us to engage with how we can remain single-minded in our focus on God's word. And we can do that by zooming in on these last 4 verses and making these convictions our own. Perhaps you would like to take these 4 verses and turn them into a prayer. You can take the psalmist's convictions and ask God to make them your own. Well, come join us as we pick up again tomorrow afternoon. It'll be good to see you again then.